Hi, my name is George Ransom. I'm a member of the Walpole Historic Society, and we're here today at the Walpole Cable outlet in Walpole High School to present to you a PowerPoint presentation on postcards or souvenir cards. So in the Historical Society, we have a number of postcards in our collection, and we've done a lot of research in terms of other programming, and oftentimes we default to go to the postcards to look at what was it like in Walpole 50, 100, 75 years ago, and what was downtown like in other areas. Postcards and souvenir cards have been a part of our history here in Walpole and other places, and we have an extensive postcard collection available down there. Some of the backgrounds on postcards: postcard collecting became a tremendous phase years ago, sometime in the late 1800s, mainly surrounding the Columbia exhibit in Chicago. We have an awful lot of number of publishers here locally who published local postcards. And so today we're going to take a look at the local postcards. I'll give you a little quick background on postcards and collecting, and get to actual sites of the postcards. So, first postcard. This is one of my favorite postcards here at Walpole. It's actually the Walpole High School, as you can see. Luckily, we have some history on it. You can see that the title of the high school is right there on it, and also the publisher. So this is what, in the late 1800s, was the high school on Stone Street. It's still there, surrounded by a building, Hills Manufacturing machinery complex on School Street. You can just see a corner of the building. 181 students in Walpole went to school here. This is another one of our best slides of Walpole because it captures Walpole around 1905, 1910. So what do you have in the picture? We have our town hall to the right with the clock tower and the bell tower. Can't see the bell there, but it's there. You have the trolley car running from Norwood Central. You have people riding their bicycle right behind or in front of the trolley car. You have a beautiful automobile on here on the left-hand side next to the Oddfellows building, and then a little further down the road you have somebody walking, and you have the other church in Walpole, the original church, right on East Street down there. You can see a little further in the background. So this is a great postcard, and this is actually a tinted postcard. Wasn't actually colored, but it was just subjected to several tints. So what was pictured in Walpole? Well, we have a number of the businesses. We have some cemeteries. We have the high school and Blackburn Hall. Churches, public buildings. The town common was pictured quite frequently. We have a large collection of East Walpole postcards. The library, town hall, various houses in the area, lakes, rivers, and ponds. So during our time here, we'll have a chance to see pictures in the past from our postcard collection. The postcard era. So the first postcard era was basically 1898 to about 1900, First World War. The first postcards were actually printed in 1873 in Springfield, Massachusetts. And as I said earlier, the Chicago Exposition was the first identification of cards as souvenir cards. In other words, people wanted to collect them. You may not have been able to get out to the exhibition, but you wanted to see what it was like, and they took some beautiful pictures of all of the buildings and what they created out there, and they were sold as souvenir cards or sent off as souvenir cards. The post office was the only ones allowed to originally print postcards. And in 1908, to tell you how fast and how many postcards were printed, 677 million postcards were mailed in this country. Quite a upsurge. All right, so no images on the first postcards. They were just plain. They were pre-stamped, and they were also called the penny postcards because they were a penny apiece. The golden age of postcards was identified anywhere between 1907 and 1910, just before the war, and mostly postcards were sent by women as a means to communicate Obviously, men were getting ready and preparing for war, and they were the ones who were sending the postcards, brief messages. Official postcard size was 3.5 by 5, and later it extended a little bit bigger to 4 by 6. So in 1908, we had a number of postcards mailed, but by 1913, we had 690 million postcards being mailed and collected. Postcard collecting was a large hobby. To give you an example, it was the third largest hobby in this country and elsewhere, next to stamp collecting and money collecting, coin collecting. It was called deontology. Still quite undertaken as a collection by many antique and private citizens. So Walpole High School, Walpole has a school collection of Historic Society collection. Carl West, who was a Historic Society member for a number of years, had a collection and did a presentation about 10 or 15 years ago. And the president of the Walpole Historic Commission Society has an extensive collection, and we'll see a number of these pictures during our presentation tonight. So we've already covered some of the taverns and lakes and ponds and public schools, but we'll also see a lot of South Walpole and what the area was like. We'll see a number of the churches, East Walpole, and our town hall. So off we go. So this is a picture of Byrd Memorial Tower and Clock. Basically around 1905, you can see the trolley heading up the hill, the awnings over there for coolness. The Byrd Tower was a center of activity in the area. It was still here when I moved here about 40 years ago. We were able to have a breakfast there. It often functioned as a post office. And on the second floor, Mary Byrd ran a social group and social service provider in that second floor. Byrd School and Byrd School houses, because they actually were houses in East Walpole, in a similar location to where the Byrd School was built in early 1900s, and this was the first junior high school in Walpole. One of the favorite spots for many of the kids during the summer was to ride your bike, get on your bike and ride down to Byrd Park and get in the frog pond. It's hard to see in this slide, but there was actually frogs in that frog pond. They were just recently rehabbed, and they drained the whole pool, fixed everything. It was a cement bottom pool. It was drained every day and cleaned out, and it was a wonderful spot for hundreds of kids to come every single day and learn how to swim. It's a different view from the bridge across the water flow into Byrd Pond. There's a stepping, you can see the kids look like they're walking on water. There's a stepping stones that was also recently rehabbed and refurbished back into the scene. The pool house was there on the right. It's not there anymore. The foundation's still there, but the pool looks like you could swim in it today. Hollingworth and Bowles was one of the large paper and mill factories in East Walpole, and here you have a site of how big and how extensive the factories were just after the turn of the century, anywhere from 1900 to 1905. And the smokestacks were still there, and they're still there today. Lower view of the Hollingworth and Bowles mill in East Walpole. It was quite an extensive operation, still in business these days, only they're not making paper anymore. This is an interesting slide. It also tells you what it is and when it was built. So this was the blacksmith shop, built in 1928, and the note on the sign, which adds to the value, is somebody wrote and sent that this is where I was living in East Walpole, Mass. So it was no longer a blacksmith shop, but it became a residence. And for those of us who've been here for a number of years, this was a used furniture shop for all of us. East Walpole Square was called the Square at East Walpole, and you can see the beautiful big elm tree there, Byrd factory with the flag out in front, and the building off to the right was the Byrd hospital facility, and Byrd Machine ran Bird Works ran 3 shifts here at the plant. You can see the Model T there and several people walking around. This is the bridge underneath the railroad tracks. The 2 railroad stations are still there. They don't look like railroad stations. And if you were to drive by and didn't know, you wouldn't ever pick them out to be train stations. But we have one on each side of the tracks under Washington Street. And so you can see the Bird Tower in the background and people on the horse and carriages making their way from East Walpole. Another picture of Bird Factory, the main corporate offices. They weren't always white. This building was white for the longest time I can remember. And it was helpful in this postcard to actually have it written on there what it was, Bird and Son. This is a view from the railroad, so somebody was up on top of the railroad tracks taking the picture of Bird Bird Factory. Moving over in East Walpole, this is the East Walpole Union Congregational Church. Still right there. Looks like it does just 100 years ago. A few big trees out in front, but it's still in the same spot, and it's a beautiful picture of what it looked like when it was first built. Once again, we're back to Bird Square, and as you can see right in the writing on here, this is the Old Morse Tavern on the right. It's one of the oldest taverns in Walpole, and on Washington Street was the main road in and out of Walpole from Ransom and Dedham, and it was heavily used. Bird Pond, this is a picture of Bird Pond. There's an extensive pond behind Bird Factory with a waterfall there, and I happen to live up near the Pinnacle, so I've walked down right by the river, and there used to be a turnaround, and Bird and Son had pleasure boats that took people out on cruises around the island and around Bird Pond. It's a pretty big pond. This is the Arches, or somebody identified it as the Arches. In East Walpole, you can see the Bird Clock Tower in the distance, but they were also thanks for Miss Ellis. So somebody identified some gratitude there in this slide. Moving up the street, this is the field, Ellis Field. And back when it was a baseball diamond, now it's, for as long as I've been here, it's been soccer fields and athletic fields. It goes from soccer to some rugby and some lacrosse in there, all used all year round almost. And it's quite a undertaking for folks to keep it up. Moving over to Bird Park, this is probably when they first put the tennis courts in. There's no trees around it. And if you look in the background, I'm not able to see any of the houses that are there now. So this was probably in the 1920s or just thereabouts when the tennis courts were first put in the park. It's a great picture of the railroad. This is slide number 1054 in somebody's collection. But it's a New Haven Railroad. It's Plimptonville Station. The station is still there. It's still stopped twice a day. The little train depot building isn't there anymore, but this was always a stop on the way to downtown Walpole, used by a number of the people in Plimptonville. You can also see the train right in the picture, so that adds to the value of the slide. Moving back over here, again, another picture, a close-up picture, a more detailed view of the Bird Tower and the clock tower and building. Clock tower is still there. We're waiting for the building to be resurrected. Hollingworth and Bowles, as I understand, owns it. And they're working on somehow at some point getting it rehabbed. You can see the horse and buggies there. There's probably 2 or 3 of them there, waiting to take people for wherever they're going, probably right off the trolley to various spots in Walpole. Right next to where St. Mary's Church is in Walpole, in East Walpole, is the Wednesday Club in East Walpole. And this was Mary Bird's social house, social gathering spot for many of the industrial people's wives in the area. And for a long time, it was also a hotel or bed and breakfast for folks. It's right at the corner of Rhodes Avenue, and this was torn down when they put the park in. All right, one of the gems of Walpole is the castle in East Walpole up on the hill. There weren't as many trees around it as there are now, but it was built in 1896 by Isaac Newton Lewis, and it looks just that way today. This is a nice postcard because it's a double postcard, kind of unusual. Two pictures of the castle in East Walpole. The other most significant estate, a house, corporate headquarters, was Endine Estates in Walpole. And when I first got to Walpole 40 years ago, the Junior League had a house that they used to show off the interior decorators. So this was the decorator show house back in, I think it was 1981, 82. And it was magnificently decorated. Each decorator took a room. There's actually 40 bedrooms in this house, a ballroom, a big dining room, outdoor area. And this was part of Bird and Sons, Mr. Charles Bird's estate. He called it Endine. And it was 80 acres along with the other side of Mylard Street, where junior high school is in Norwood, was his 80-acre farm connected to the house. Sadly burnt down a number of years ago. Bird Middle School looks just that way today, other than the portico in the front. It isn't there with that elaborate front, but it's now been turned over to condos. Nicely done. It's a beautiful setting. And they built the new condos right around the house, the schoolhouse, which is condos. Back over here in the winter scene to East Walpole, you can see how big the tower was. A brief story about the tower. At one point, Bird and Son had been sold. They'd been cleaning up the site. The tower was going to be imploded. We had a demolition crew down there, TV cameras, fire, police, all set up to explode the tower and take it down. And on the first try, nothing happened. It was a no-go, so we had to wait another week or two and redid all the work, and it came down in one big boom, and there goes the tower. It's right next to the technical building on East Street. Picture right near my house. I live on Plimpton Street. This is on the corner of Plimpton Street and East Street, and this is the Bradford Lewis Memorial Statue. It was erected to Bradford Lewis, who was a prominent citizen. Lived in the street, and I actually live in the Bradford Lewis house just down the hill a bit. And you can see the tower was erected in 1910 and was identified in East Walpole. Now, to give you the other perspective from the Bradford Lewis house is the Breakus Lewis statue. And the Lewis barns are there, so there were 4 massive barns on the Lewis farm. You can see one in the background, and there was a corral, and they had 120 head of cows and sheep and pigs, and it was quite an extensive farm, covering about 200 acres. But his statue was there by Isaac Newton Lewis and his sister, who dedicated the statue to the memory of their grandfather, protecting the land here in East Walpole. View of the train stations, one next to the other, railroad station in East Walpole. The original fire station built in 1905, 1907, and there's the tower right there, and somebody in their horse and carriage. This is a view of the still a tower from the river. It looks like it could have been in the middle of the river, but it gives you an idea of the technical building we talked about and the actual tower itself. Bird Clock Tower is right there in the almost center of the building. Now, it's important at least to look at postcard collecting with a mail stamp on it, and usually the stamps were on the side that was written. So this one has a stamp on the actual picture side, so that may tend to make it more valuable, but it helps us date the actual postcard itself. This is a tinted postcard, as we talked a little bit about earlier. Tinting was first done, they were black and white, and then we moved to using a series of tints to highlight the postcards. So this is the trolley from Norwood to Walpole with the bird clock tower there. And on the left-hand side, you can see the tremendous elm trees, and we'll see that Walpole had a tremendous amount of elm trees shading not only East Walpole, but the whole town itself. Bird Avenue, the road no longer exists, and we do have a Bird Street up the hill, but no birds ever lived on it, as far as I have been told. But this led to the Andine estate of Charles Sumner Bird. Here we have the shade trees here in East Walpole, and those are all, at least were originally all elms. Colored or tinted picture of the East Walpole railroad station with the freight car right there ready to load or unload. There's a great picture of the Triangle building here in East Walpole on this slide. The building is still there. The Triangle building is still there. It's done over in white. The roof in front is not there anymore, but that Triangle building still exists. And F.W. Bird and Son in East Walpole. Moving over to another section of East Walpole. This is Union Street, heading toward which might be Route 1. And you can see still a dirt road, so that helps us date when this postcard picture was taken. Another tinted postcard, and you can see the beautiful elm trees up and down the street on the left-hand side. Moving over to Bird Park, Francis William Bird Park in East Walpole was run by the Bird Foundation for a number of years and was taken over as a tremendous site and dedicated to when Francis William Bird met his early death by disease. His father created was originally a planned community, but made it into a park for the local residents of Walpole. It's as big as you can imagine. It's probably 80, 85 acres of land there in the park. That's a wonderful resource in the town. Now we're over to Rhodes Avenue in East Walpole, right near where, almost across, kitty corner across from where the old library was, or now it's a rec building. Actually I did the presentation in the Walpole Library a couple of nights ago, and one of the gentlemen attending actually lived in this house. And he can remember back when he was a kid that there was a stable right there for horses, and basically a blacksmith also worked out of this particular barn. He remembers tearing it down. The house has just recently been rehabbed and looks beautiful. Trolleys. Here we have the 5-cent trolley, and you can see that the company is running the trolleys from Norwood Center to Walpole Center. It's a 5-cent ride. Takes about a half an hour. And this was an enclosed trolley, so this wasn't one of the first trolleys. They were all bench seating, and they were open trolleys, so this was closed. And you can see it says Rosendale right up there, and it went all the way to Boston. And what you see on the sign, it's hard to read, but I'm told by somebody that was part of the concert area in Islington, right next to where Roach Brothers is, right in Islington Center, where they stopped and had concerts on a regular basis. So you could go to the concert in Islington. Once again, that picture of East Walpole statue. This is about an acre of land. It doesn't look that way. And the prominence of this particular picture was that all the cement coping around these statues and monuments were removed and taken to the Bradford Lewis House, downtown Walpole on Main Street. And the mystery somehow is that this statue is no longer there. It's right behind where the tree is to the right. And nobody knows why it was moved, how it was moved, or anything about it, which seemed kind of strange because Isaac Newton Lewis was lived in the house right next to this statue on the right for most of his life and was a major historian. So we don't know why it was moved or any other factor of that. You can barely see the sword. The sword is no longer there. That was removed, and we don't really know who took it, but we're still looking for it. And you can tell the statue was originally bronzed, and we know it nowadays, as my grandson said, when are they going to put the pumpkin on his head, or when are they going to put Santa Claus's hat? Or in recent years, Bruins, Celtics, Red Sox, and Patriots jerseys go on Breccius Lewis to commemorate the celebrations of sports in our town. This is the paper mill at Bird and Son, identifying the tower at 250 feet in East Walpole. This is from the side where the new condos are on Riverwalk Way, where there weren't any trees at this point, all cut down for firewood, most likely. Another view of East Walpole with a trolley, and the Bird and Son building, the Model Ts, people getting off, and one of the things we noticed about the trolleys and the people coming in and out and about, everybody's, they weren't working people, they were all dressed in their Sunday attire. So I was amazed to see how well dressed everybody was all the time in the pictures. So some of our local publishers, where were they published? Well, I was surprised to find out that we have about 12 or 13 local publishers right here in Walpole who publish postcards. Farrell, Morton, Perkins, Quimby, Fullerton Drugstore, which is in the or Oddfellows building downtown, A.L. Hamilton in South Walpole, and a lot of the folks printed their own postcards. Some of them got shipped off, as you can see, Fries in East Walpole. They were printed in Germany until there was an embargo on German goods in the area, and they're no longer printed in Germany. We have some handmade souvenir cards that we'll see later on in the presentation. And Rhodes Brother in Norwood was a big publisher, and along with American Art and Postcards in Brookline. Back to our pictures. So this is a picture of Clark's Pond right on Stone Street. You can see the big ice facility right there. They made ice on the pond. And right now what you'd see is the Stone Street garage, and you'd see a knife sharpening facility, and an electrician owns a small building there. But originally it was ice. The next body of water we're looking at here is Lewis Pond. The Lewis Mill is right in front of us. Lewis Manufacturing, later Kendall, but you can see that folks are out on the Sunday afternoon all dressed up, taking a nice rowboat ride on the river. It's not that deep and wide now. It's been silted over a bit, but you can see how extensive the factories were downtown Walpole. Somebody identified that oftentimes there may not have been somebody in a rowboat in there, and they might have been painted in. So that was kind of an interesting fact to find out. So now we're over here to Maury's Pond, which that name, if you looked on the map, no longer exists, but it became Turner's Pond. And one of the most famous Walpole skaters in the Olympics in the early 1900s was Mr. Turner. He had a house near the pond. Relatives still live near there on the pond. And you can see off in the distance is the Turner ice making facility and storage facility here for Turner Pond. Close up of the pond and the mill site, so this is probably a more clearer view for us to see the facilities. We're still on Maury's Pond, and this was another view from the river of the ice making facilities. Now it's a major skating opportunity for the kids in the Walpole Recreation Program. This is a bird's eye view. One of the things that we noticed about early postcards was they were able to get to views that we would normally not have access to. So this was a view probably taken from a blimp of Stetson Pond. Stetson Pond no longer exists, and Stetson Mill, we'll see some more pictures of Stetson Mill shortly, but that was basically right near where the Watson's Candy site is located, near in the corner of Kendall Street in East Walpole. Postcards were used for advertising pretty early on, so you can buy a motorboat for your motoring pleasure here, and it helps us to identify. This was Sumac Incorporated on Stone Street in Walpole. The great example of a local advertisement. We still use postcards nowadays. They're not restricted to the small size. We get them every day. I just checked the mail yesterday and got a postcard from one of the politicians, and it was an 8x10 postcard. So here we have the Stetson Falls in Walpole. This was an earth dam. On the right, it's hard to see it, but there was the rocks that you see all over Walpole. They made the stone walls, but they're also used to support the earth dam there. And there's a walkway over the dam itself in the falls. And this fall was a shorter fall. It's probably 8 to 10 feet. Another tinted view of the Stetson Falls. It's probably a better view. You get a better idea of what it was like, and the stone foundation right there. Here we have Caruso's Island, and it's not really an island because there's a house over there and there's a road that goes right on the bridge right there. This is basically Clark's Pond, right on Stone Street, where that is. So here we have the same pond, and everybody all dressed up on a Sunday afternoon, looking to enjoy themselves. It looks like he has a baseball bat from what I could see. Once again, Highland Lake, out for a Sunday afternoon ride. Nice postcard. We're back to Clark's Pond again, and I was identified that the sailboat was painted in this picture. It's a pretty large boat for a small pond that we see here in Clark's Pond. It's pretty low, but could have been. Now we're moving over to South Walpole, and these were the original car barns, as they were called, where the trolley cars were housed. This is once again a helpful postcard to tell us that there was actually Turner's Pond in Walpole, and it looks doesn't look that expensive when you see it, but it's a pretty good sized pond. It's very shallow, so it freezes pretty quickly. This is a triple header. These aren't great postcards because the clarity isn't there, but they were waterways in Walpole. We're in downtown now, so we're moving to take a glimpse at Town Hall. This is one of the 3 buildings in Walpole is on the National Historic Register of Sites in Walpole. The Town Hall being one. It was the first one put on the National Registry back when I first moved in here in 1981. It's a magnificent structure, and this is a great postcard picture of the building as it is today. Another view, and this is an important view because it tells us on the back when it was stamped, but it also shows electricity and telephone wires when they were going through Walpole. So it helps us date when those particular upgrades were made to the town, 1910 and on. It's probably one of the older pictures. It's not as valuable, but it's because it's in deteriorated condition, but certainly it shows you an early 1920s automobile, but it also identifies right in the front who published it. This was published in New York City. This is probably our most historically important postcard because it shows what it was like, Town Hall, when it was probably first built. There's a barn right, Clapp's barn was right over to the left-hand side. And on the right, it's hard to see it, was the original stone school that was there. This is probably pretty soon after the development of Walpole High School. on Common Street. Moving over to Fisher School in East Walpole on, well, it's probably not East Walpole, but it's right on Route 1A heading toward Westwood, right near Fisher Street. This is no longer a school, it was it's local businesses. The school is a few blocks behind this particular building. Once again, as one of my favorite pictures was the Walpole High School. It's still there nowadays. A number of the buildings were damaged and burnt in fires. So this building is built around for some reason, and take a walk or take a ride by it, and you can get a peekaboo view of a corner of the building still in the middle of the Hill complex. View from across the street, Walpole High School, probably 1920. This was a pen and ink sketch of Walpole High School when it was first rehabbed. Beautiful picture. Now we moved over here to one of the other local facilities that's over 100 years old. The Aggie School is a tremendous gem for Walpole. There's about 75 acres connected to the Aggie School, and it's a regional vocational technical school. Been in business for over 100 years. They have extensive cows, barns, riding area, and they just built a new barn that if you've ever been in there and around, it is really magnificent to see what they've done with it. It's a great place on Thanksgiving, Halloween time to take a haunted hayride through there and become scared. Stone School, the story behind the Stone School, it was called the Grammar School for a number of years before it was named. So the original school was built around 1880s and wasn't named, and about 20 years later it was named the Stone School, probably because it was on Stone Street, and there's still parts of the Stone School there now. Moving down to South Walpole, another school that we see pictured here was the elementary school in South Walpole, the Boyden School, before the additions were put on. By the cars here, we're looking at probably 1960. Great picture of the grammar school before it became stone, with all the kids out front during recess. Another frontal view of the high school, Walpole, Mass. Nice to see there's a little white border, which indicates kind of the time frame that postcards had a white border on them later on in the 30s and 40s. Now we get to an advertisement, the WALPOLE INN, 17 miles from Boston, on an automobile route between the two cities, between Boston and Providence. So we were kind of a halfway point. You can see 26 miles to Providence. So basically it was about 40 miles back and forth. A beautiful structure. You know what they had for dinner. We know they had a telephone at this time. We also know who the proprietor was. But we also know that there's a few rooms available for transients. Not a term we would probably identify with people who are staying at the inn, but this is located right next to Guild, right across from Guild Street on Route 1A, right near where the bus depot is, where all the buses get parked and Stop and Shop area there in McDonald's. This is one of our bird's eye views, as it's been called, from a blimp most likely. Either or somebody climbed up the 250-foot pole locally. But to give you an example of Lewis Manufacturing, this is the railroad right down to our front, and manufacturing employed about 75 people in the carpet and other related businesses right down here in Walpole. Right now it's a site you won't see for long because the condos are coming in. Plimpton Block, so this is East Walpole on the Plimpton Block. The Plimpton brothers built a dry goods store here for years. Still looks almost exactly like that nowadays on the corner of East and Route 1A, Main Street, and there's the horse and carriage there. So we know the building was built around 1888. The Bradford Lewis Community Center. This is one of those postcards that has a white border on it, but Bradford Lewis moved from his house on Plimpton Street downtown to develop this massive house, and his business was located right behind it. So he had various mill sites and cotton wastewater washing and other facilities were right in the factories behind this building. And he lived his whole life in Walpole, and he was important because he was a major contributor to, he and his brother, to the Walpole community in the church. He was a deacon of the church for 40 years. He donated his house upon his death to the Walpole Church, and they made it a community center similar to what we might see now as a local YMCA. They recommitted the barn to basketball, auditorium, studies for materials, catechism classes up top, and people lived in the house right there. So that was right on Main Street, right near where CVS was. And once again, we see the magnificent elm trees here. Another older view of Walpole, still with the trolley coming in, a couple older cars, and so you can see the Oddfellows building, and that building's been there for a number of years, and the Norfolk-Bristol Railroad car was right there. And we also know the publisher of the postcard right there. And we can see the date, 1930 it looks like. So the Oddfellows been in that building for a number of years. A view of downtown, the Commons, as we can still see it. Walpole's unique Commons because it actually three separate triangle slices of land in the center of town. And you can see how wide the street was and how the elm trees just graced the side of the road. Now we're looking at the Congregational Church over on Common Street. This was, part of it was lost to a hurricane in the 30s. A glimpse of Walpole Depot, we're talking about the train station downtown. Somebody wrote on the front of it, "Many happy returns of the day, Kitty." You can see the electrical wires here, running electrical and telephone connections in the town. And the train station was a busy place with the freight trains going through, and as many as 55 trains a day went through the center of Walpole. So it was actually a hubbub of a place. Oh, one of my favorite pictures here is the Andrew Carnegie Library. He donated about $15,000 for the building of this particular gem of a library in downtown Walpole on Common Street. 1960, they put a massive addition on the front of it. It soon outlived its size. The original building is still there. You'll see it from the side. But the Birds were gracious enough to donate the land, and Mary Bird, who was the social advocate in East Walpole, delivered thousands of books in her collection to the library when it was opened, and funded the land for a preparation site for the building to be built. So quite a contribution to the town. Another view, this is a black and white picture of the library. We luckily nowadays have a gorgeous new library downtown that anybody who comes down there and can boast about how functional it is and how busy it is. Another bird's eye view, close up this time, of the Lewis manufacturing, that Willard Lewis. You can see the town bird tower, the town hall tower in the background, right in the middle of the picture. But all various buildings and mill sites. There were a number of twine, cotton wastewater factories or units built in there, and that's how big the lake was. So it's quite a large lake. The green you see is part of the common. It's not a great view, kind of a washed out slide, but a black and white Main Street in Walpole, and you can see the bandstand there. And that was built in 1903, and it's been a staple in the downtown for a number of years. Every summer on Tuesday, come by and listen to the music. This is Main Street looking south, heading toward Ransom, as it's written on the postcard there. The building on the left is still there. That is one of the builders who was advocating for the building of a brick building, George Craig, and he was instrumental in fighting off Byrd to get a brick building built, not a wood building for Town Hall. And his brother's building was right over there across the street on Main Street. So it was quite a sight to see. Downtown, when I first got here, this was the one of the hubbubs of Walpole. Swenson's tailor clothing shop was here. Right next door you would see the Watson's Candy was there. And this was the post office building. It was a rec hall downstairs. There was a pool hall and many other Edison and other building services in the town were located in this particular building. A number of years ago, the bank took it over and tore it down and put a connection to the Walpole Co-op Bank, which was part of this building, and also part of the town Oddfellows building across the street. So it still has a similar look to it. The water fountain, this was a gift by George Arthur Plimpton, 1900, roughly, to the town to commemorate the French and Indian War. Here we have a site of Common Street, and looks like we have 4 people walking down the middle of the street. Obviously the traffic wasn't as busy as it is now, but they're out, maybe they're Sunday attire, but they might have been staged in this part of the postcard. But this is what Main Street looked like 100 years ago, covered by elms. Another view of Main Street. This was an important card because it identifies Front and Common Street, and it became an advertiser for one of the local publishers. And you can see that the news store, and they identified on here what you could buy on Sunday paper, Christmas card boxes, stationery. You could buy a doll and candy. So please tell your friends about it. So here we are, postcards. And it identifies right on here that it was a souvenir postcard of Walpole. Another picture of downtown with the red roof building over there. It's hard to identify what house had a red roof on it, other than remembering the Howard Johnson that used to be on Walpole. So this is another Common Street view. This is a view from probably the Walpole Co-op Bank area. You can see the bandstand over there and various other buildings in the downtown. So this is that one middle section of the Town Common. Here we are on that middle section of Town Common, looking toward the banks and the other businesses, Watson's, the bank, Town Hall, and the Oddfellows building. And look at how many cars were there. We've got a great picture of somebody walking across the middle of the street here. So Walpole was a fairly busy town years ago. This is the Charles Byrd water tower, and it's nicely dated by somebody, August 21st, 1907. The Byrd fountain was just recently been rehabbed, but it's you can barely see it on there, but there are four frogs. It was called the Frog Pond at some point, because the frogs from the river would make their way up Common Street and end up in the water trough there. It's been recently rehabbed and dedicated to one of our fallen soldiers here, Mr. Basevich. Pastel view of Walpole, somebody sitting out on the park bench, enjoying the nice weather and the trees all around. This is the United Church in Walpole. This is one of the amazing feats I've found out about Walpole, is that they had a number of smaller churches and three of the churches collaborated and came together to form the United Church. So three smaller church congregations got together, pooled their resources, and developed quite a church connection here, right downtown Walpole on Common Street, with a daycare, a church, a library, an auditorium. It's actually called the Bradford Lewis Auditorium because he was a deacon in the church at one point. So it has quite a history here in Walpole. This is the Congregational Church in Walpole. This was on East Street, right near where the hairstylist is, and Eastern School and Spa, or the florist shop on East Street. So this is probably one of the first churches in Walpole. This is another view of the Unitarian Church in Walpole. Before the clocks and everybody was put together in a collaboration, there was a clock tower in there. A bell was up on the belfry, and various other connections to Walpole. Right next to the building we see on here is the diner. It was open, as I've been told, 24 hours a day. There were 3 shifts coming through here, and all of the factory mill workers right behind. Main Street, Lewis Manufacturing, the Fales Company right down the hill from here, and truckers going through here. Don't forget the major route between Walpole and Providence was Route 1A and Route 1. So truckers would go through, and shift people would come down here and grab a meal. There were a number of people who lived in boarding houses in Walpole, on Lewis Avenue, namely. And we have the Walpole Hotel a few doors down on the left-hand side, just heading out of town. And there were a lot of folks who came to eat here. Another view of downtown, you can see the Spear Building, or the Lewis Building, on the left-hand side. And you can see that we have a combination of the Model T cars and horses, and horse and carriage, still being used here in Walpole. Next, 1921 is our, as I can see here, for our date. One of the most impressive buildings here in Walpole was a gift to the town. Around 1930, they erected a beautiful social and recreational building. So this is, for those who aren't from town, right behind Town Hall, and it served as the social functioning hall and gathering point for social activities in Walpole. The sewing circles, social activities for children and kids, and the rec center for a number of years was located in the bottom floor of the building. Still very highly used. The cannon was moved along when the fire department had temporary quarters right in front, right where the fire, the cannon was. Another view of the Congregational Church. This is probably a better postcard in terms of the detail and the clarity of the picture for us, but this is the one on East Street, just before you get into town. Corner of East Street and Elm Street. Pardon me, East Street and Main Street. Walpole, 1940s, number of drugstores, service trucks in and out, and a busy place, downtown Walpole. It's an older card, but we're on the corner of School Street and Common Street, published by E.W. Havens, and that's Delaney's Funeral Home over there on the right. It's a little grainy of a postcard, but still it's a good picture of that particular street. Taken probably from right where the library is on our right in Lewis Avenue. Next slide is Common Street in the winter. It's not a great slide, but certainly it pictures a quiet pastoral scene here in Walpole Town Center when it was snowing out. This is a good picture because it also identifies what it was. So this was the Rexall store, and it identifies F.W. Fullerton as the proprietor of that store, and he ran the store for a number of years right here in Walpole, along with publishing a number of the postcards. So prior to the presentation, I took a little journey around Walpole to see if I could buy a postcard. There are no postcards for sale in Walpole. There are no local postcards. They haven't published postcards probably since the late 1960s in town. So there are some privately published cards that are more business type cards that people send reminders of things or notices, mainly from real estate agents and other local businesses. But this is the drugstore right in the Oddfellows building. So you can come down, get a prescription, have a soda, pick up a postcard, and be on your way. This is a postcard of the town center with a bandstand right on the corner of Front Street here. And once again, people all dressed out in their Sunday attire. Three of the churches were located right here off the center, so that they would be likely to be churchgoers. Great picture of our trolley again, Town Hall, and the building is the white building you see in front of you is right where the Walpole Co-op Bank was. So the Co-op Bank was put in there in the 1930s. So this is well before that. Somewhere 1920s. Look at the hat that the woman has right here on the railroad trolley car. These are electrical trolley cars. You can see the connection to the overhead wires. Another view of downtown Walpole where the commercial bank is. It's no longer there. It's just up for sale. And I did hear a rumor that there was going to be a restaurant in there at some point. But this was probably a late 40s picture. Once again, we see the Baron's Drugstore in the International Order of Oddfellows building. The building doesn't look that way nowadays. There was a fire there. And now the windows that you see with these beautiful arched awnings aren't there. It's just square windows now. But it was a busy place, and that's to our left. You see somebody on the bicycle. That's where the diner would have been. And this is the church in Walpole. It was a Methodist church located on the Common. It's right next to where Lionhurst is. And for those who don't know what Lionhurst is, it's the other funeral home across from Delaney's, where the big statue of the lion is located on his lawn. And a quick story behind the lion was that it was fished out of Boston. Two ships were sunk, and the owner fished out the two lions and put them on his front lawn for a number of years, one of the colonels. This was a church in the center of town for a number of years, and later became, when it burnt down, a parsonage for the Unitarian Church downtown. Central Depot, this was the stop downtown, Walpole Heights. It's not depicted on the map, but this is basically where Ellis Street is and Common Street. So you could get off the train heading out of Walpole and just a short walk down to Walpole Center. One of the largest companies in the country was Kendall. Basically made Curity. They made Band-Aids and developed a tremendous business. This building is still there nowadays, and you can see the railroad car pictured right in front of it. This was originally part of the Lewis manufacturing plant in Walpole before it was turned over to Kendall. Kendall bought it, well, it was purchased by George Arthur Plimpton around 1900. When Lewis Manufacturing was financially struggling. And the building basically was the biggest producer of Band-Aids and or other products here in Walpole. Had about 75 or 80 people working around the clock on various shifts in that particular facility, and was still an active facility nowadays. Right down the street from Town Hall in the center of town was the Fales manufacturing plant. So this is a site around 1900, 1905 at the latest of the Fales machine shop. And you can see the carriage right in front. It was noted for the first identifying the first industrial sewing machines with multiple needles. And don't forget, right next door, right across the street, was the Lewis Manufacturing, who made all types of cloth, cotton, and cotton fabrics, along with furniture, stuffing, and everything else. So it was a big industry right in the area here. Now we have probably 1910, you see the expansion of the Fales building. When the foundry part was put in, you can see the two big towers there, and those are basically the furnaces for the foundry part that became part of Fales machine, which fed Bird and Son a lot of their technical components. Greenwood Garage in Walpole. There's a Greenwood Street in Walpole, right down from the center of town, and this is their advertisement for repairing your cars. It's right on State Road, as it said, but it's right on the main street heading out of Walpole. There's another view of the close-up view of the older cars here, and some of the mechanics working on them, and one of them looks like a tractor, so they worked on all kinds of vehicles here in Walpole. Memorial Bridge dedicated to the soldiers and nurses of World War I, right on Stone Street. First Parish Church in Walpole was the original building right off the Common before the United Church became part of it. So how do I identify different postcards? Well, this is an example of a postcard. You can see the publisher written right on there. You can see this is a split back, which identifies who the postcard is to be sent to. And we know it's going to New Britain, Connecticut. Nobody actually wrote any message on it. We can see the postmark, so we know the particular date it was posted. It was a 1-cent post stamp on it, so it's postage stamp over the stamp. And somebody had purchased this particular card for $5. So this is the single back card on the top, where you're going to see the writing of the person to send the postcard to, along with the stamp, and the split back different postcards. For $3.50 you can get that particular postcard. And we know that they were sent around 1905, 1907, along with the publisher. Some more postcards in the collection. They add value, they add detail. Some of them are hard to read, and they sometimes write a lot more than they should in there to make sense out of it, but certainly it was a method to create a quick note to somebody, oftentimes when you might have been on a holiday or vacation. Walpole Motel up on Route 1. Probably about a 1960 picture, black and white, postcard of the hotel and the swimming pool there. So this was a busy place partway through for truckers on their way from Boston to Providence. The pumping station down here on Walpole at the south end of Town Forest, and the community church is right there with a community building there for distribution of surplus food for the food pantry. One of the cemetery pictures here is the Jackson Memorial Chapel in South Walpole, and it's a beautiful building built around 1900. This is a picture. There's still some doubt about whether it was actually Walpole, Mass, but it's a picture of the old Walpole meeting house or town hall by A.C. Merrill Publishers, as it's written there, but you can see written right up on the top of the roof. It was 1772 that the building was there, so that would have been similar to a time frame where there was a town hall on the town common, where religion and town business was conducted in the vestibule of a couple of the church facilities here. There was also a Walpole, Mass. There's a Walpole, New Hampshire, and a Walpole, Maine. So there's still to be determined what town that was in. I think it was Walpole. Pumping station. So this is a postcard of engine house number 1, South Walpole. Still there nowadays. St. Francis Church in Walpole on East Street. It was one of the earlier Catholic churches in the area. It was a very regional church because there weren't any other churches halfway between Boston and Providence. So we had people attending the church all the way from Attleboro, Plainville, Ransom, and other areas. St. Francis Church, when it was built and rehabbed to brick, the older cars, it's hard to be able to date this particular postcard, but it's a great view of the beautiful church they have, and you can tell there's no school over there. The school is right next to it on the left-hand side, but it's Walpole St. Francis Church. Front view of the Catholic Church in Walpole. And then we moved to Blessed Sacrament. So at some point, it was a name change. I'm not sure why the name was changed in the mid-1900s. And still a vibrant church here in Walpole. Beautiful picture right here. In the middle of Walpole, right near where the senior new senior center is located, in the police station, is the manufacturing plants here. So this is Massachusetts Chemical Company, asbestos and rubber company. So it's a pretty extensive plant here, and you can see the pool, the pond right there next to it. This is an example of a handmade sketch of a postcard. This is the Allen House, and you barely see it on the bottom, but it was 1722 Walpole, Mass. It was recently just sold, and before it was sold, the Historic Commission had a chance to go through it, because in order to sell it, they had to cut back on part of the garage you see on the right-hand side, or originally a stable. But the Allens were significantly impactful people here in the center of town, and this was identified as Allen's Corner in Walpole. This is the Cedar Junction train station heading on your way out of town toward West Street. A small station right here for farm supplies that were picked up and dropped off, and with the train splits. Picture of Walpole High School. Moving down to South Walpole, this is the Wright House. It's right on the corner of, right at the end of Washington Street, published by Chamberlain, and it says the reflections in South Walpole. It helps us identify where it was. And that building is still there on Water Street. Beautiful handmade postcard. Somebody took the time and trouble to paint this painstakingly. And an example of handmade postcards that are available. This is a lot higher value because it says Walpole, Mass. And there are only a few of those still around now. Another Greetings from Walpole card, all hand painted. This is a very interesting slide because there's an insert in it. It's very unusual because I haven't come across any of those other related postcards. So it identifies for us that Chamberlain was the publisher in Norwood, but it was the Bullet House you see down below, and across the street from the Bullet House would have been the Fuller Tavern, which we see right there. We'll see some more pictures of that. And there was some writing on the side of it, so that helps us identify a little bit about more of the history of Walpole. This is a picture of the post office in South Walpole with the carriage right there, and the Methodist Church. The town had a post office in South Walpole years ago. Pauley Tavern right next to where the post office would have been. It would have been the next building heading toward Walpole Center. It's a large tavern that was here in Walpole with meals and rooms available. Another view of the old Pauley Tavern. You can see the church over to the right-hand side. Now we're moving across the street, and we see Washington Street and the old Fuller Tavern in South Walpole. There's quite a bit of industry down here in South Walpole. in the early part of the 19th century, right off of Bird Machine, right behind where the Fuller Tavern is. Another picture of the Fuller Tavern. The building is still there. Looks that's nice. It's been kept up. It's quite an old historic building. Inside the Fuller Tavern, it became famous because Lafayette rode through here on the road, and this is the ballroom of the Fuller Tavern. Might have been a picture of Lafayette right there over the fireplace. I couldn't tell, but the reception room here at the Fuller Tavern, the hand clock there and the fireplace. This was the kitchen at the Fuller Tavern. They served, along with a beverage, you can get a full-fledged meal here at the Fuller Tavern. And it's a great old colonial fireplace with the hearth and also for cooking the oven on the side. It's an important picture because it identifies the Fuller Tavern as a spot for livery services. So you could take a stagecoach right there in the front, and this was the Fuller Tavern and the Poly Tavern were one of the big stops along the way. And from the Fuller Tavern, the next stop would have been the Lewis Farm. And I've been told by Calvin Plimpton from when he talked about it, he said his father can remember that they used to take a stagecoach into town. They had a big business in Boston, and they'd be serving or bringing groceries and fresh farm products on the carriage into Boston and coming back with lobsters. So that was all part of the railroad. Horse and buggy railroad. The Bullet House, it's a beautiful slide. It's a tinted colored slide, but shows you the Bullet House in South Walpole. And that pretty much wraps us up here for our program of the postcard collection of Walpole Historic Society. We're available and open pretty much every Saturday from 2 to 4 in the Deacon Lewis building right downtown. So if you have postcards, we'd be happy to add them to our collection, either just by scanning them in. We have a scanner down there. We can take a picture of your postcard, take it right back with you, or donate your collection of postcards that you might find up in Grandma's attic and other places around. So thank you for your participation.